It is day 4,509 of Boswell Book Company being in business, and welcome to Boswell's virtual event series. I'm Daniel Golden from Boswell, and we are so honored to be hosting Mirin, the author of Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP. The book is out today, and people have been so excited for this book for months since it was first announced publicly. And I think there was buzz even before that because the talk is that the author interviewed many people in town, movers and shakers, from people to people on the street. It is the inspiring story of Giannis and his rise to superstardom. The book's already been winning amazing raves like Publishers Weekly, which called it a captivating portrait of sincere, diligent, and humble talent, which serves as a refreshing antidote to the often depressing stories of those who become corrupted by success. Mirin Fader is a staff writer for The Ringer. Her work has been honored by the Pro Writers Basketball Association, the Associated Press Sports Editors, and the U.S. Writers Basketball Association. We are so honored to have Fader in conversation with Chris Herring, senior writer for Sports Illustrated and author of the forthcoming, I think it's January 18th, 2022, Blood in the Garden, the flagrant history of the 1990s New York Knicks. He's covered the Knicks for the Wall Street Journal and teaches at Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. It is such an honor to have you both. As I was mentioning before, I love the book, as did our buyer, and I know Milwaukee is going crazy for it. So thank you both so much for coming, and the conversation begins. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Mirin, how are you? I know how you are because I've been talking with you all day and texting with you all day, but I just want to say first how proud I am of you and how big a day I think this hopefully is for you. And just I hope that you're kind of smelling the flowers a little bit because you deserve it. I know how much time you put into this, but thank you for even inviting me to be able to do this with you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so excited.
Well, let me get started with you here. I mean, part of the cool thing about this for me is that we, as Daniel said, we were kind of doing this at the same time, both working on books at the same time, staying up, having nightmares about the same process at the same time. I know some of this already, but what exactly was this born out of? As far as I know, you did a feature story on Giannis's younger brother, and we're in Giannis's home, but still, that's a far cry from the idea of doing a whole book on Giannis, someone that I don't think he's ever been media shy at all, but someone that has never gotten overly close to one reporter to where they could just kind of have a full close-up of his life or anything like that. So how did you decide to do a book on him, and what was that process like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time, when I did that story, he hadn't even won his first MVP, but it was clear like, okay, this guy is going to be a superstar. And I just felt like, how do we know so little about him? I felt like we only knew like the broad outline of his life, like sold trinkets on the street, and then he rises to superstardom. And it just felt like this giant gap in between. And so for me, like when I'm looking to do a long form story, and in this case, a book, there's got to be some kind of compelling human element to bring the story together. And with Giannis, people just kept saying, wow, he's such a freak athlete. Wow, he's got all these physical gifts. But when I was in his home and I was watching how loving and sweet he was to his brothers and his mom, and how, vulnerable he was sharing things about the death of his dad, I just thought, you know what, there's other softer sides of him that are worth exploring, that are, so much more compelling in a way than, how great of a basketball player he is. So that's sort of what led me to the book.
Okay. Now, one of the things I think I respect most about the book, and it's funny, kind of reading around the reviews of what people or other outlets had to say about it, it would be really easy in a situation like this where Giannis, like you said, the kind of the outskirts of his story, we know his family grew up extremely poor, endured some really horrific kind of poverty where, the kids were going hungry. Giannis wasn't eating until 11 at night, based on your reporting it sometimes, and would sometimes kind of lie about the fact of whether he'd eaten so that he could give food to his brothers and not make them feel guilty about it. Sometimes when people tell stories like those, it gets to be a tearjerker, and it's kind of just that. There's not really a redemptive aspect of it. I don't know if it's redeeming necessarily, but I think you made a pretty valid effort here to try to balance it between just that and just kind of the really, really awful stuff that he endured, but also trying to sprinkle in elements of joy there. Is there a favorite anecdote that you had in reporting that when you heard it or when you interviewed someone that really made you smile? And how did you go about trying to elicit those sorts of anecdotes that were happier, to try to at least balance out some of the sadness and some of the tough moments that he faced?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Joy was something I really wanted to center because, even through these difficulties, he had so much fun with his brothers. Like they made a joke out of everything. So my favorite anecdote is Giannis has a really good friend growing up named Raman Rana, and he's of Pakistani descent. He's Muslim, but he also grew up pretty poor himself. And so his opportunities to get food were limited. So Giannis was like, okay, let's go to the church. They give free food to kids in need. And Rana was like, we can't, I'm Muslim. And then Giannis like, no, trust me, like I got this, it's gonna be okay. And they go to the church and the priest is just like looking at Rana and he's sweating bullets and he's like, oh my God, they're gonna know I'm not Christian. And Giannis just pulls him into him and he's just like, look at my friend, he's a good Christian boy, such a good boy, like he needs help too, like can we get him some food? And the priest is like, okay. And then Giannis just turns to his friend and he's like, you got to trust me, bro. I got this. And I just love that so much because, okay, is this not a direct glimmer of the charismatic personality we've been watching through these playoffs? Like he's always had that. He's always been funny. He's always been extremely empathetic and hilarious. And I just loved learning about those things from childhood because, again, like you said, there's this tendency to trauma instead of zooming back out on joy.
Okay. So I know we're probably going to save some questions for the end, but since some of these that are already here kind of in the flow of what we're talking about, hopefully Devin won't hate me too much. I think we kind of hit on the question that he asked, which was about what made you want to do a book on him besides just the fact that he was, a superstar player. So I'll move on to the next one, which is from, I think someone we're probably both at least loosely friends with, Mirin Metcalf. He had a question that was literally next on my list here, which was, what was your greatest hurdle in the writing process and how did you navigate that? And as someone, again, that's pretty close friends with you, I dealt with quite a few texts from you that were like, this is never going to happen. In fairness, I sent my fair share of texts to you where I said the same thing about my own book. But what do you feel like kind of stood out as the toughest thing about this for you that either made you feel like it wouldn't happen or it would be a lot harder for it to happen if it did actually happen for you?
First of all, hi, Myron. So grateful to have you here. Yeah, this was just really, really hard in general because I only had 1 year to do the book. Normally authors get 2 years or more. And Chris's face. We're gonna get
I had 2.5.
Everybody pre-order Blood in the Garden. That was a nice little segue. And so yeah, I only had 1 year. And so that alone, it was just like 20,000 words a month were due. And it's so antithetical to my process of writing. You remember those texts? Wow. And my process is usually like report the whole thing and then write. But for this, because it was due every month, I had to like really just zoom out and say, okay, what goes in this chapter? What goes in this chapter? And like be very intentional about where I'm placing anecdotes. And when you interview 221 people like I did, the organization was just such a beast. And so I think for me, it was just like, okay, what are my strongest anecdotes? How do I organize them in an interesting way that show readers things people don't know about Giannis, and also do this amid a crazy year where I can't even travel. So to combat that, I had to be really resourceful. Instead of going to Greece, I hired a researcher on the ground in Sepolia, and this man was so awesome, and he would just send me videos and photos. Essentially, it's like, it felt like my back was against the wall for so many things, and I just had to be creative. Google Maps, surprisingly, has the old church. Okay, let's go through it and see what it's like. And then let's ask a Greek journalist, can you go in there and see what it smells like? I need that detail. So again, it's just these random, I know it's ridiculous. I don't know how they don't hate me. Just being really scrappy.
I'm going to use that as a segue and an opportunity to say that, and it showed up in one of the reviews today, I think, that was done on her. I think it was the Washington Post one, if I remember correctly, where one of the most, one of the best anecdotes, I think, that really takes advantage of kind of the five senses was one where Giannis wanted to buy a dog for his girlfriend. And speaking of smells and different things, that Giannis sent, I think, a Buck staffer, if I remember correctly, to go get the dog for her as a surprise, an intern, but the dog did not smell friendly to the senses, to the nose. And when the intern actually brought the dog to Giannis, Giannis was like, where did you get this dog from? Why does it smell like this? Essentially. So, I mean, this book is really full of anecdotes that really make you smile, which again, if you know enough about Giannis's history and backstory, it's kind of more wrenching, I think, even than the way it's really been presented. And I mean, like I said, I think Mirin, that's kind of the service that Mirin does to this book, is that it's hard. Some aspects of it were very hard to just kind of picture and read, unfortunately. But you know, when you hear him talk, you don't really hear a whole lot of that. He's someone that has had a good life, obviously a great life at this point for where he is right now. And I think that Mirin balances that part really well. Let me ask you about some of the things that that he has dealt with to kind of get into that part of the story. Another thing that I think is kind of conveniently skipped over, kind of glossed over, as he's been here in America now for a while. He's someone that has Nigerian parents, who was born in Greece. Greece is a country, as you mentioned throughout the book, that does not have birthright citizenship. So he was not a Greek citizen, despite the fact that he was born there. It operates differently than America does. And eventually, over time, kind of became the stud athlete that was trying to make a life here in the NBA and in America, but didn't even have really documentation to be able to do that, let alone documentation for his family, let alone the full-throated support of everybody from the country, which I guess you don't need that. But there's a difference between not having the support of everyone and facing essentially neo-Nazis or a neo-Nazi group that even to this day really doesn't want to have much to do with him and doesn't want him representing the country. What forces, for people that haven't had the chance to read the book? I know some of y'all have, because the Milwaukee bookstores were like, we don't care that the book doesn't come out till today. We're going to release it a week or two early because it was selling like hotcakes. But can you kind of walk folks that are on the call through exactly what this man was facing, what his family was facing, as far as not just abundant racism from some people in Greece, but also just the challenge of trying to get documentation to be able to come over to America, and the impact that had on Giannis's well-being when he first got to Milwaukee?
Yeah, so when Giannis was growing up, there was a neo-Nazi criminal organization. It would later be ruled a criminal organization called Golden Dawn. And Golden Dawn believed that, Greece is for Greeks. That was their slogan. They would go into majority migrant neighborhoods like the one Giannis lived in, called Sepolia or Kypseli or Kos or other neighborhoods like that. And they would literally chase migrants. They would stab them and they would kill them. And it wasn't just like, this is a mob violence group that has no impact on political politics. They were the third largest party at one point, and they held a lot of seats in parliament. And so Giannis grows up being acutely aware that he can't go anywhere alone. He could be a victim, a target of this. And at the same time, he's dealing with the constant fear and anxiety that his parents are going to get deported because they're undocumented. And so, when he sees police or when he sees Golden Dawn, which are easily identifiable, they would wear gear that would let you know that that's Golden Dawn. He just would sprint the other way. And it would be so terrifying, these moments where he comes so close to them and he's keenly aware of their presence. And then you had the everyday racism of being Black in a majority white country. Yes, his neighborhood was other, migrant groups, but when he was on the basketball court and when he was in school, it was a completely white space. And when he went to away games, they would shout racist things from the stands, like "Go home, monkeys." And so Giannis really only got his papers or respect from the Greek government once they saw that he could be a star in America and go to the NBA. But if he hadn't, he would be treated like other Black migrants, which is not very well. And so it was important to me to put that context, because I think Giannis's story has been, because it's so awesome and miraculous and inspirational, and because there is an element of hope that he brings to this country, there is so much swept under the rug, and it's framed instead as a fairy tale, a rags to riches story. But the truth is, he wasn't always accepted then, and he's certainly not always accepted now, even as he has ascended to the highest ranks. So yeah, I just thought that that context was super important.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm being honest, I think honestly that the strongest part of your book to me is the fact that you kind of took this almost, for film lovers, the Kurosawa approach, where you kind of showed it through different lenses and different eyes of different people. You kind of laid side by side two of Giannis's teammates or people that he came up with that were extremely talented. The other thing is that Giannis didn't come up wanting to play basketball, really. He wanted to play soccer, right, which was kind of what, ran in his family as the pastime. And someone essentially pulled him off of the field and, said, I think you'd make a good basketball player, which confused him. But anyway, I think the strongest part of the book was that you took two other people that essentially were more or less kind of Giannis's talent level, maybe a little bit shorter, and did not have the experience he had as far as being able to get documentation for himself, for their families. You kind of explained already what prompted you to include them in the book and to kind of tell their stories in the book, which is rare for a biography like this that's just about Giannis. At what point did you decide to do that? And how much time did you spend kind of talking to those people for the book? Because I imagine you really had to kind of get to know them a little bit more than you would for the average person for a book like this.
Yeah, I actually spent so much time talking with other Black migrants or other people that are Black that would be citizens, but because they were born there, it didn't matter. Their parents migrated. And it was just really important to spend hours talking with them about their own experiences, whether they knew Giannis or not, because I wanted to show a stark contrast between, like, look, if Giannis wasn't this tall and this athletic, like, this could have been his fate too. A lot of his childhood friends that are Black that grew up in Athens are still going to the place where you get papers every morning at 4 a.m. only to be turned away and said, you need this paper. No, you don't have it complete. You need to go back. And they're looking at Giannis ascend and they feel prideful for him, but at the same time, they want him to speak up. And so I think the other reason why I brought them into the story is because I wanted to also chart Giannis's hesitancy in talking about race and talking about his experiences, because to his friends from back home, they're like, look, like, you talk so much about your Greek identity. I want to hear more about your Nigerian side. And, what's behind the hesitancy, or can you just be more vocal? And he has been more vocal for sure, especially this last year. And so I just thought it was important to bring that in. And I think the other thing, it's a writerly thing, when you write a book, as 120,000 words, everything is a scene, everything is a character, every object is a character, place is a character, setting is a character. And so for me, it's like the more people I can introduce that are interesting, that can add color and texture to the book, like, that's important to me.
So I'm gonna go to some of the questions here in the audience. I feel like if I save them all for the end, I'm not gonna get to most of them and I'll forget that they're there. A couple of people have asked this question, then I'll go to another one. I guess it's kind of a two-part question. Is there something that really kind of pained you to not be able to include in the book, or a funny anecdote that you had, or just a good anecdote that you had that didn't quite make the book? Because it's like you said, there are kind of limitations to what all you can include. And if not, something that kind of ended up on the cutting room floor, who would you say was kind of the most difficult to get for the book, that might have paid off the most for you once you got them?
You know what? I hate my answer, but it's the one that came to me. There was a lot of Jason Kidd on the cutting floor, and I know that doesn't really matter. And that there were
tell that to the people that were writing all these stories about Jason Kidd and how he hates people with Android cell phones and everything like that. I think people would have taken more Jason Kidd material if you used it.
Do you know how mad Android Hive is at me right now? Like, I'm like, I'm sorry, it wasn't me, it was Jason. there were just things that were just below the pale that would really even surprise people that are in the know about Jason Kidd that just legally I couldn't put in there. And that's fine. It's not a book about Jason. I don't write things to get aggregated. I actually really hate getting aggregated because they often take away all the context. But yeah, there were so many stories, I think, in there, which would have illustrated more of Jason and Giannis, because there were just things that Jason did that Giannis did not necessarily like. But I'm not going to put something in a book unless it has 2-3 sources confirmed, So yeah, I wish that I could have gone more in depth, but that's the thing about books. It's all subjective, right? Maybe I kept it in and it's fine, but maybe that cut something else. I think there's no right answer. I could have written, I actually did as I rewrote this book like numerous times. And I know you rewrote yours numerous times. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Was there someone that was particularly tough for you to track down that once you got was really great or really helpful for you?
There was a lot of people that were hard to track down. I would say Giannis is, actually, Danny Ferry of the Hawks. It took months to get Danny. So Danny Ferry was the former GM of the Hawks. I had to give the context. And the Hawks were, Chris is laughing, it's gonna make me laugh. Danny Ferry and the Hawks really wanted Giannis, but they had this whole secret thing where they wouldn't even tell people in the organization that they were thinking about Giannis, and they smuggled him to Atlanta. And I was hearing off the record stuff about secret meetings and just trying to convince these guys to go on the record with me. As Chris knows, it's like a dance to be like, can we go on the record? Why not? And then these guys will spend 2 hours telling you something you can't use. It's the most frustrating thing ever. But finally, Danny Ferry, after months of coaxing, was like, okay, I'll talk to you. And it was the best because, first of all, he had this quote, we got through this without me crying, because he's obviously so upset that he didn't get Giannis. But I just think the Hawks thing was illuminating, and the persistence paid off. I just kept texting him. And I was like, oh God, unclear if he's blocked me or not. But again, as it's a make the extra call, be feisty, be persistent, be professionally stalk someone. And eventually he was like, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. And you just have to be ready. So I always, at that time, I wasn't really writing in coffee shops because of COVID, but I'd have to go to the market or something. And I always bring a recorder with me just in case somebody calls me and I have to do a car interview. So you just stay ready.
So we're not going to gloss over the fact that you said professionally stalk someone, which means you apparently have expertise in that, which maybe I don't even want to know what that entails. Although I'm a reporter, so I probably do know what it entails. But so I want to touch on one thing before I move kind of to Giannis and his NBA career, and obviously what's transpired over the last few weeks, last few months for him. He's someone who got to the NBA, had talked about, if you watch his Draft Express videos and stuff like that, talked about, they asked him, what is your hope? He's like, I just want to make it to the NBA. That was essentially what he said. He didn't say he wanted to be an all-star. He wanted to be an MVP. He wanted to be a champion. He wanted to make it to the NBA, which quite frankly, given where he was in his life, with his family's life, that would have been a huge accomplishment. It would have been life-changing by itself. Then he actually got to the NBA and essentially started telling his family privately, if the Bucks or if the people that I'm dealing with here in Milwaukee can't figure out a documentation scenario for you guys to bring you over, I'm coming back home. I don't want this if it means I have to do it without you all. How seriously, you had that anecdote in your book, which I think was really important and I think really telling about how, I think that was in the chapter that's titled Lonely, how lonely he actually was. How seriously did you kind of take that anecdote that he actually would have considered going back abroad if his family wouldn't have been able to join him in Milwaukee?
Yeah, it was serious. I mean, when the youngest brother Alex was telling me about this, I was like, did you think he would really go? And he was like, yeah. And it shocked him too. And I think it was that anecdote is really important to me because I think at the time, you know, especially people in Milwaukee, like everyone was falling in love with this charismatic rookie. Like he was so funny. He seemed like so sweet. He was falling in love with smoothies. He was like trying everything for the first time. He was like an internet sensation. Like people were using the words adorable to describe him. But underneath that was just real pain and loneliness and sadness. And I don't think unless you were part of the Bucks organization or his family, you knew that. And so that was just really eye-opening to learn about, because I think especially now, you know, the NBA has so many international prospects and we just don't talk about what a tough adjustment it is, right? It's not just like, I come to America, I play basketball, I make money, I'm good. It's learning the language. It's dealing with homesickness. Giannis literally would feel like, okay, what do I do? Like, I'm just sitting in my apartment. I don't know where to go. Little things like, I don't know how to pay my cable bill, or, you know, just dealing with the sudden change of not having money to having all the money. And it was deeply, deeply upsetting. So yeah, it's crazy, right? What if he left? There would be no Greek Freak. There would be no championship. Like none of this would have ever happened. And why did the family get to come? Because the Bucks were owned by a senator. Okay, like a US Senator, Herb Kohl, whose assistant, Joanne Anton, who I chronicle in the book, is this woman nobody knows behind the scenes. She ironically is fluent in Greek. How? I don't know. John Hammond finds this out on the day that he meets Giannis, when Joanne starts talking Greek, and he's like, okay, what are the odds? Again, like, it's all these improbable things. Like, what are the odds that she knows Greek and can communicate with the embassies and get the proper visas? And so I just don't think his family would have came over if it wasn't for the Bucks people fighting. And in my reporting, I learned it was rumored it went all the way up to the Secretary of State, which was John Kerry at
the time. Wow. There's a whole lot to that. And I mean, you go into pretty good detail. Obviously, now we've seen kind of the transformative impact that Giannis has on an organization, which you spend quite a bit of time in kind of tracking the story, not just current day, but also going back to really the 70s with the Bucks, and the last time they had a transcendent talent like this with Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You more or less kind of say that had Giannis not been in Milwaukee around this time, there's at least a chance that Milwaukee might have lost the team, just as far as the rundown stadium, the team. You know, that was right around the time that I started covering the league for the Wall Street Journal. I remember going to those games, and you could hear the individual kind of barbs and chants that the crowd would throw out, or an individual fan would throw out, because there were so few people there. I mean, stuff was pretty dire. I mean, walk me through kind of why it was so important for you to kind of tell that part of the story. And I know you spent a pretty decent amount of time talking to a number of fans that have kind of lived through a lot of this in Milwaukee as well. Why did you take that route with the book?
Yes, some of my favorite interviews were with Bucks fans or Milwaukee natives or longtime, because, you know, to understand Giannis's rise, you have to understand what these people have gone through before him. There was this like decades old wound about the team leaving for Atlanta, and then Kareem, this generational player, leaving. It's this wound of like, well, you might start here, but you're not going to end up here. And it was so important to talk about that, because the Bucks are getting really, really good as Giannis gets really good, but to not talk about the times that they were so awful, and they, you know, practiced in this dinky practice court where there's water coming from the top, and Chris Middleton gets injured because of these facilities, and there's a scary policeman mannequin at the door, and, you know, they didn't have any heating. So the car attendant would start their cars at the fourth quarter. He knows it's going to be a blowout. He gets the cars ready for them. Some players who didn't have enough gas would run out. So it's just important to talk about that, because you got to understand where they're coming from. And then they're saved by the most unlikely of superheroes, you know? So there's two themes I wanted to explore in the book. The Bucks save Giannis, right? They give him a chance. They change his life. He has generational wealth. The Giannis saves the Bucks. He keeps them from leaving the city, because Adam Silver said right before he came that if you don't get basically a modern day arena, you're going to go. And, you know, it was just important. And then when Giannis is contending with whether to stay or not, we can't talk about that decision unless we understand how horrible it felt when the last generational player left. So one of my favorite quotes was by this really cool person I talked to, Raj Shukla, and he said, like, we feel like we grew up with Giannis. So again, like the tie to Milwaukee is so different than other franchises.
Yeah. I've got a couple more questions, but honestly, I'll start digging into some of these that folks have left because I think they're good. I don't mean to put you on the spot too much, but Aaron Stample asks, he read the book in 2 days, didn't realize that the Antetokounmpos had an older brother, Francis, who was in Nigeria. He basically asked, how would you describe the family's relationship with him? Did you get any information on that as you were reporting it out? I mean, that did stand out to me. I didn't know that they had an older brother either until I read your book.
Yeah, so that was one of the major things that I was like, oh my God, I literally know nothing about this. How do I find out more? So that was an emphasis from the beginning. And Giannis, so starting in childhood, Francis was left behind and grew up with the grandparents in Nigeria while the rest of the kids were born in Greece. So Francis is older. And it was something that Giannis wouldn't really talk about with his childhood friends. You know, I talked to a lot of his best friends, and then all of a sudden it would just kind of come out like, you know, Thanasis isn't the oldest. Like, we have one more. And it was always this weird thing that like people weren't sure, like, okay, well, why did he stay? Or, you know, it just wasn't something Giannis would talk about. And I think Francis, as well as what mechanism did the family originally travel to Germany? Because the book actually uncovered they didn't intend to come to Greece. They intended to go to Germany, and they went to Germany. But the method, right? Boat, like literally how, those are the two unexplored questions that I still have. And I have a lot more clarity on the current relationship with Francis, which is they're really close now. He is actually a rapper and he lives in Athens, and he has come to Milwaukee a bunch of times and hung out at All-Star game and stuff. So they have a really good relationship, but yeah, it's just, I mean, 221 people, like nobody wanted to open that.
And how could they if he doesn't really talk about it much? Or
yeah, because Giannis doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting. You kind of get into the book how private he still is, you know, and what it's like for a couple of people to kind of break down that wall with him. And one of my favorite anecdotes was you talk about someone from the organization inviting him to an EDM concert, and Giannis going to go ask his mother permission, like this professional basketball player, first round draft pick, is like, well, I got to ask my mom first. And I really like that anecdote. I'll skip to one more here, and I'll probably bounce around and ask a couple others from the group that are here. Someone says, Andrew Fine says, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the timeliness of this book, which, as I said before, seems like it's aiding in book sales since the bookstores are releasing it early and what have you. It said, if you had the opportunity to write about Giannis and the championship, which obviously you didn't get a chance to do given the timeline of the book, what angle would you explore maybe differently than the way you approached it?
Well, actually, I do have to write something, and just check the date. It's August 10th. It's due September 15th. It's going to be in the I know what it's like. It's going to be in the paperback edition. So I'm doing a whole new chapter. So TBD. But I will tell you the image that stands out to me that's been in my head. And I think a big part of my writing process is images, because I'm very inspired by Toni Morrison. And one interview she gave was that all writing starts with an image. And one time she wrote a book based on this image of a horse, which I thought was so fascinating. So the image that comes to mind for me that I would like to center this last epilogue is when Giannis is sitting down on the chairs after winning the title, and he just lets the emotion out. It was such a powerful image for me, because for those that have read the book, and I hope I'm not spoiling this anecdote, one of the fascinating things about his childhood I found was that he openly cried on the bench during games, after games. He's upset with himself, he would cry, and it wasn't weird. Like, they don't socialize poison men the way that we do here in America. And his coaches were like, yeah, game happened. Giannis cried. That was a thing. And Giannis, when he came to Milwaukee, the strength coach and the strength coach's name is Robert Hackett, and then the coach was named Larry Drew. They would catch Giannis tearing up on the bench or in a practice setting, and they had to say, look, like, you can't cry, like, at least not publicly. We don't do that in the NBA. And I love a good tie back. And for some reason that is staying with me, because he learns to manufacture this really like mean, dominant personality, masculine bravado on the court. But as you see in interviews, as you see in him sitting down and crying, there is this like very empathetic, sensitive, emotionally intelligent man that I think really endears people to him. And so I would just love to kind of somehow tie all of these themes together.
Okay. So kind of piggybacking on some of that and some of what I brought up just a moment ago, where there was a moment where he was just thrilled with the idea of making the league. And then something kind of switches, or kind of, someone flips a switch inside of him where he goes from doing that to then making the league and being this scrawny guy, which to me, that's still the wildest thing about Giannis, is like looking at the pictures. Like that's a glow up when you look at how skinny this man was and how small this man was. and the phrase that I use, and I think used with you even when I interviewed you on a podcast recently, was he looks like the Incredible Hulk. Like when he finishes a dunk and he does the whole thing, like he looks like a Hulk now. What changed for him to make him kind of as terrifying as he is now? I have a list of things. Was it nutrition? We talked about the fact that he dealt with food insecurity. Was it that he had a growth spurt, which could have been because of the nutrition stuff too? Was it the weightlifting? Was it Jabari Parker? Was it Jason Kidd? If you had to pick one thing, two things, like what do you think really flipped the switch for him to kind of make him pretty? I don't think anyone was afraid of him. No one was really worried about him at first, to what he is now, where it seems like nobody really has an answer for him. What changed for him at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a number of factors. Although I enjoyed interviewing the team chef for many years, he said, look, like, yes, we were feeding him and he didn't have that type of nourishment before, but you can't like isolate just that as the reason. So personally, I think it's that he gained confidence. Yes, he clearly developed physically. He spent so much time in the weight room and would just look in the mirror and like practice his scowl, which I found like really hilarious and great. But it was confidence, it's like he always had this quiet confidence in him that just knew like, okay, I'm gonna be good. And he would tell people that. He would say like, next year I'm averaging 15 and 10. And they just look at him like, okay, like, sure. And, this is Giannis that's getting like pushed, and he falls across the baseline and his feet are in the air at one moment, Zach Randolph is like, excuse me, weight room. And I think that once he got confident in himself, it's just like people couldn't stay in front of him because he knew that he was better. And I think the finally I'll say is that his family got to be there. He completely changed after that. Once they moved to America and they were with him 24/7, he became this very bright, happy person. And that I think enabled the growth.
Okay. So I'm going to skip to one question here that I think a couple of people asked. Christina Tapper, who I know you're really tight with, is a mentor for you. A few people have asked questions around the way you did these interviews, the way you organized these interviews. Hell, I have that question, even though I just finished my book, about the way you organized your interviews and what you found to be helpful. How did you go about doing that? Was there anything that really worked for you that maybe could serve as advice for someone that wants to tackle a project like this at some point?
Yeah, so I had an anecdote book, and as you know, like we make these calls with people, and sometimes you'll talk to somebody for 2 hours and you only get one anecdote. And it's important to write that anecdote in an anecdote book because number one, you're celebrating your win because it's a year of like non-gratification in the sense of like nothing is coming to the public's eye. So you have to enjoy this process. And the anecdote book is a way for you to say, okay, look at this. This anecdote was so strong. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to celebrate it. I'm going to note it. And it's also a way just to keep track, like, wow, I'm getting a lot, because I think sometimes it's so hard to feel like you're making progress because you're just very isolated and working super long hours by yourself. And also, if your notebook isn't getting filled up, then you're not getting the anecdotes and you need to work harder. So that's also a kick in the butt, I guess, as well. I think the other thing is like organization. I mean, I sat down when I started and I was like, I have no idea what to do. Like you and I were just winging it, and then like you would figure out something really smart and I'd be like, okay, I'm copying you. And then I would be like, did you try this? And then we would just do that. So I think the other thing is like be friends with other writers who are there for you and inspire you, like Chris does to me. And then I made binders of every year. So 2013 to 14, 2014 to 15, 2015 to 16. And I separated it by dividers, like did I get from my reporting and what was an article by somebody else? Because I think what makes books so confusing is that you're interviewing like hundreds of people, but you're also able to pull from other people's stuff. And the most meticulous you can be about noting where you got something, the better, because you have to be able to at any point say, I got this here. When your fact checker, mine was really great. His name's Adam Framal. When I would like tell him like, hey, check this, I would be able to pinpoint like, okay, I got it from this thing and that's where you find it. So I would just say like, nobody knows what they're doing at first, but you just have to be really organized.
So on that note, I realized that I kind of misquoted Christina's question, which was exactly what you just brought up was, we don't quite know what we're doing with this. It feels like the world's worst game of Tetris, trying to make stuff fit and move stuff around. At least for me, that's probably because I'm not the writer that Mirin is, but how did you approach revision with this? I know that just texting with you and talking with you that you were asked to kind of change some things around, which I think we all take that to heart a little bit. The first time we see it, particularly when you're being asked to submit 20,000 words a month and you already have a full-time job on top of that, that also requires you to write and revise. How did you approach revision with this? And also there's a question here about all your chapters were one word long, which is kind of different for books. How did you decide to do that? And how did you approach that?
Yeah, so I guess I'll do that one first. So for me, it was so hard to know what to put in each chapter because I hadn't done the whole reporting thing because I had this 20,000 a word deadline a month. So I like really didn't know, if I see the whole thing and I've done all the reporting, I have a sense of what goes where. But when it's kind of like being 1/3 through the journey and being expected to tell us how the whole thing goes when you haven't done the other 2/3. So one word chapter has actually helped me understand what it was about. So for me, I'm like, lonely, got it. It's about loneliness. Star, this is the glow up chapter. Stateless, I'm going to focus on that. It actually was like an organizing principle. And then I was like, wait, why don't I just do one word? Maybe I should just keep it. And that's what happened. And then, so the other question about revision, writing changes a lot. The first draft was not good. Second draft, not good. I mean, one of my favorite videos is Ta-Nehisi Coates' Creative Breakthroughs. You can find it, just Google Creative Breakthrough Ta-Nehisi Coates, The Atlantic. And he says that writing goes from like utterly terrible to like somewhat terrible to like less terrible to like okay to like sort of okay. Maybe it's kind of good. And then I think it's good, unclear, and that's you try to get it to your best. That's what I feel like revision is. When I keep that in mind, I understand that the whole thing is failure and it's hard because I'm judging myself as I'm going through this. So that's my fault. That's what makes this harder. But I've done this enough years to know that like I'm not going to nail it on the first try. And by the way, I never think I nail it. I'm always like perpetually trying to nail it. But I just keep rewriting and rewriting with Coates' thing in my head that says it's going to just progressively go from less terrible to hopefully what you want to say. And that your editor can see something completely different than you. Sometimes you think this one anecdote is so important, and then your editor reads it and he's like, actually, this has no purpose. And that's good. That means they care about you and want to edit. So I think for me, it's just being thankful that there's care in my work, and just trying to not beat myself up, which is a perpetual thing that I'm working on.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I beat you up about beating up on yourself.
I know,
and I
you're
need to
just
work on it. But I need to work on it for myself too, because the book is a grind that I don't think can really be explained
You
or
wanna tell them-
understood until you're on that side of the fence.
So Chris had this rule, NCS, no compliment season, which means that we were both like very unsure and just, no, we gotta just, don't think about that. Don't think about, is it good, is it bad? Just keep grinding.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple more here. I've got two of my own. Maybe I'll ask those first just to make sure I get them in. How did Giannis's father passing away impact him? If I'm remembering chronologically, I think his father passed, and then I think he won MVP for the first time in that season, if I'm remembering correctly. That impacts anybody who is close with their family, particularly as close as Giannis is with his. How did that impact him? How did that change him?
A lot of his friends told me that it like pretty much hardened him, a bit. And because he thought that nothing else could harm him after all he and his family had gone through, right? Like that was supposed to be that life. We're supposed to be living this life over here. And but once that happened, it was just like shocking, because it's like I thought we went through the worst, but this was truly the worst thing that could ever happen. But it also made him, so he had a quote, he said that he wasn't afraid of anything anymore, because this is literally the worst thing that could happen, and it happened. And so there was just like a fearlessness that it created in him. And I also think that it made him be even more nurturing towards his brothers. He had always sort of played this quasi father figure role, but literally he was an NBA player acting like some older brother who lives at home instead of the dorms at UW. Like he would just go to Alex's practices and what's for dinner, and what do you need help on? Like you just almost forgot he was an NBA player. So that's how present he was. He would just like walk in the gym and like forget that he's Giannis and just not have security and just sit at the top of the bleachers like, Alex, you need to box out. And so I think that all of the brothers got closer after the dad's death. And when I went in their basement, the coolest thing was the what do you call it? Like a portrait in the basement. It said, "I am my father's legacy." And it was all the brothers doing some basketball move. So that's kind of their motto now, which is like everything we do for our dad.
There's a whole lot of this. This will sound corny, so I don't mean for it to, but a lot of this stuff reminds me a lot of The Lion King, just from him trying to practice his face.
Yeah, the scowl.
There's a little bit of Simba there, but then also like trying to honor the father's legacy when that happens completely out of the blue, unexpectedly, and you're lost a little bit.
Right.
So there are some elements of that just emotionally kind of hit the same way, seemingly, to me when I read the book. So we've got a couple questions here from a few different people. One question is one I know I've talked with you a little bit about, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to share it with other folks. How did you decide on the cover image? Because I know that was something any author gives a lot of thought to, but I thought there's kind of an interesting rationale behind why you went with the cover image, which, by the way, the cover is really striking. I'm sure most of you all, if not all of you, have seen it, but why did you go with that one?
Oh my God, it's so pretty. Like, I'm so thankful to Hachette. I was, because I own a lot of sports books, and it's, growing up, the joke in my house was like, the only book Mirin will read is a sports book. And it was like, it's like basketball and that's it. Tunnel vision. It's usually like some player looking very menacing, or like driving to the hoop, or like shooting. It's like the same thing, right? And they just sent me these covers, and it was so clear to all of us, like, this is the picture. And they chose it because he was, I think he was playing at Toronto in that game or something. It was definitely an international game that he was photographed at. And so number one, we liked the fact that it had that international flair to it. Number two, his eyes. I was so captivated by his eyes. It's this like hopeful looking up eyes. And if you remember the classic Giannis interview with Gavoni, when he's 17 and he says, you know, what do you want to do? And Giannis is like, I want to be an NBA player. What captivated that video was not, I want to be an NBA player. It was Giannis's eyes, just black and sparkling, looking up. He was looking up the entire interview. It was so moving seeing those eyes. The priest I interviewed of his church, the one memory he had, Evangelos Ganas, it's been a minute since I did the audiobook. You know, I just can't. I'm so glad that's over.
I'm looking forward to listening to that. I haven't listened yet, but I've read the book twice, so I'm looking forward to hearing that part.
Yes, I practiced my Greek. He just remembered the eyes. He would say those innocent eyes. So eyes are a clear thing in this book. And when I saw the cover and I made that connection, I was just like, oh my God, this is perfect. And then the blue, it's just gorgeous. Like Hachette really did their thing with that. That was great.
Yeah, cover image. I remember, I think, telling you that I was jealous of you from the standpoint.
Yeah, you did.
For me, I didn't have a singular person. I mean, you can't anchor your whole cover around Patrick Ewing or Pat Riley. So the fact that I needed like 5 people in my photo and there wasn't a photo like that existed, I'm like, all you had to do was get Giannis. But
I know you were a little salty. You were a little
cover
salty.
image. On that same wavelength, someone here, Felipe, has asked, why did you choose to have the word improbable in the title? Is it a reference to how difficult it would be to find another Giannis? Does it relate to all the suffering of the people that are trying to migrate from Africa to the Western world? Again, you and I've talked about that a little bit, but was that something that you were kind of thinking about as you came up with the subtitle for the book?
Yeah, I think it was a couple things. It just felt like every turn he was not supposed to make it. Like that there's multiple improbabilities. Number one, the fact that he grew up not having much food at all, and he becomes somehow escapes this really awful situation where they're getting evicted constantly. Like he wasn't supposed to ever make the NBA, he's undocumented, so he doesn't have a passport. So he can't go to the US to get scouted, or he can't go to other tournaments to get scouted. Again, improbable that scouts found him despite those obstacles. The Bucks draft him without having his medical information. Totally improbable. That never happens. That's a huge risk for a team. Again, improbable. The Greek government giving him citizenship at the last minute because he could be a star. Improbable for a Black migrant. Chris said his body early on. Look at it now. Improbable. So I just, again, winning a championship from, if you remember the Bucks of the 90s, you would never think they'd win the championship. Improbable. Small market. So I just think that like every aspect of his journey was improbable. But the funniest thing in the editing process, I kept using, this is so funny. I have family members on this call. I said the word stunned, stunning, so surprising, because the temptation to talk about like how improbable it was, you're really like running out of synonyms. And I kept repeating the word stunned like 500 times. And now I'm never going to use it again. But I'm glad that improbable worked in the title.
Okay. There are a lot of Bucks related questions here too. People have asked anything from, how has Giannis been impacted by the city of Milwaukee? Do you feel like this story or this outcome with him winning a title could have potentially been impacted by, or whether it could have happened in another place, if it would have been as likely to happen in another market? Do you have a reaction to that? Just kind of how Giannis has been impacted by the city of Milwaukee since he's been there?
I mean, I think I think Giannis would be successful no matter where he went or no matter who coached him, because he has a work ethic that few have. But I do think that he was successful here largely because of Milwaukee as a city, as a franchise. The only reason he gets into the game really as a rookie is because the Bucks suck. Like they won 15 games. Like he gets to, like, there are perks to being a bad team. And so he gets to just like develop and make mistakes because they're so bad and there's so many injuries. And again, like, would that happen on another team that, you know, the Thunder were talking about stashing him in Europe for a couple of years, or, you know, these days they would just put you in the what's called, you know, the G League now. But like he got to stay and develop because there just wasn't as much pressure. They picked at 15. If it didn't work out, you know, that would just be another time it didn't work out. And that's what Bucks fans were used to back then, you know? And so I think that, yeah, I think that this was the right city for him also because it's quiet and he's quiet. Like he is different from every other modern day superstar. You know, he's not flashy. He doesn't want attention. So this fit for him. And also his mom and his brother really liked it. They made a life there. You know, Alex started at middle school there. So his formative years were in American school. So it's not like they just happened to be there. They created a life there. And I think they really, really loved it.
I'll chime in with one here that ties to that same sort of subject that ended up being something that I think you kind of dodged having to worry about it, but also probably prompted you to kind of end the book differently than maybe you would have had to. Obviously, he would have been a free agent this year had he not signed his Supermax close to a year ago. I actually don't remember talking to you much about how much you stressed about that, but how much did you stress about that? How were you planning to approach that? I don't remember much. I probably was having, I guess it's not PTSD if you're in the moment still having the stress and the trauma and what have you, but I was probably dealing with my own stuff with the Knicks book, which by the way, I'm writing about a period 30 years ago and I'm stressing about it and Mirin's trying to write about it in real time.
Oh my God.
How would you have planned to kind of approach the free agency stuff if this book comes out today, but Giannis hadn't made his decision about what he was doing until earlier this past week?
I was so stressed. This was actually a huge problem. I, you know, didn't know that. So I got the book deal in March 2021, and we didn't know that he was going to stay until December 20. December 20. Yeah, 2020. No, okay. I promise my brain is not broken as it feels. March 2020, I got the deal. Giannis decides to say December 2020. So you're looking at a time period between March and December of not knowing this. And I think I just, in order to cope and in order to also meet this 20,000 a word month deadline, I was like, I'm just not even going to think, like, I don't know what I'm going to do with the end. I don't know how we're going to end the book. I'm going to stay in childhood. It was a true gift for Giannis to stay to me because I knew I wanted to end the book on something about home, because I wasn't going to be able to know. I really wasn't but I wanted place to be the final note, because I think his whole life he's been searching for a place to belong, whether it's accepted by race, class, athletic ability, geography, home country, abroad. And I wanted to ended on some note of coming into terms with who he is as a person and where he belongs. And so I just thought, okay, like I have no idea where he's going to play basketball at, but can we end on some human note of home, finding home, whether it's in yourself, in your Milwaukee, Athens, wherever. And then he decides to stay. And I was just like, oh, thank God, and then in his tweet, he said, this is my home. And I was like, home is definitely the title of the chapter. Again, you know, so that's how my mind works.
So I'm going to ask one more question here. I guess it'll push us just past 8 o'clock here in the Central Time Zone. You know, Giannis is someone that still seems to be, I mean, he's 26 also. So, I mean, anybody who's 26 is still a work in progress. He's, you know, obviously a finished product just from the standpoint of good enough to win an MVP twice, good enough to be the best player on a title winning team. But he's still changing, I think, as far as just kind of his consciousness with certain things. We talked about his statelessness before, and it seems like he's still finding his voice on some of those things as it relates to Nigeria, as it relates to Greece, and kind of calling out some of the really horrific stuff that his family faced in Greece and the treatment. What do you think is next for him, whether it's basketball? I don't think they're going to be favored to win the championship, which is rare for a team that has guys that young and the core is intact and everything. He's a guy that came in just wanting to make the NBA and then wanting to be the best player in the NBA, then doing that, maybe arguably, winning a title. how important to him do you think it is to win multiple titles? He said a few weeks ago that if this is all he ever accomplishes, he can live with that. But I get the impression that he wants more. What do you think changes for him now as far as his goals on the court? And what do you think is next for him off the court?
Yeah, I mean, on the court, I know he did say that, but I definitely think he's not satisfied. I think that as incredible as he was, there were also moments throughout the playoffs where his weaknesses were on full display, and I am sure that he is working on those things religiously. It's also trying to get his baby brother to the NBA. So the goal of the family is to have all four in the NBA. And so Alex is working out with some NBA teams right now. And so I think, his goal is to get him there. Like he said, Alex is the only one I really see myself in. And so I think that is next for him as well. I think that Giannis took a major step ahead in terms of leadership, and leadership is not always doing things by action. It's speaking up, and that's been a struggle for him his entire career. Jason Kidd used to just like really humiliate him and try to get him to speak up. And you saw him speak up so much during these playoffs. And so I think on court is like, how can he continue to be a great leader, not just by example, but vocally? And then I think that really ties into how I think, what's next for him off the court is like, there are a lot of people, especially people in Nigeria or Black Americans or other, ethnicities in Greece right now that want him to speak up more about that side of his identity, but also like citizenship, birthright citizenship, how Greece is making it even harder to, it's just like America. They just do a million loopholes to try to prevent people of color and migrants from getting papers or, housing. They have their equivalent of redlining, all of those things. So I think there is a real hunger for him to speak up about those things. And I think people were definitely encouraged by what he said at the Black Lives Matter protests last summer. But I think there's also just a general hunger for him to speak up about, okay, so your parents cooked Nigerian food. What kind of food? Like, what was your favorite dish? Like, people want to know those things. And so I think what's next for him is figuring out his comfortability, how much he wants to share, how much he doesn't. I just think lastly, I'll say there's this huge talk, can he be the face of the NBA? And then Giannis like, I don't want to be the face of the NBA. Sincerely, Giannis has turned down very, very high profile, high paying endorsement deals that I can't say because I can't, but he has turned down things that would blow your mind. And that's because he doesn't want attention. So I think for him, what's next is figuring out how public he wants to be and how private he wants to maintain. And that's tough for a 26-year-old who is also a first-time father.
Yeah. Well, I know I appreciate you having taken this much time to go through my questions. I asked you questions a week or two ago. So some of them were repeats, hopefully not too many of them, but thank you for allowing me to kind of MC this to some degree and to sit with you. I'm proud of you. You know that already, but congratulations on this. And hopefully this was enjoyable for the folks that got on to listen as well. Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, I'm so grateful for you, Chris. And I'm sorry, everyone go pre-order Blood in the Garden right this second. It will make me very happy. And I don't care if it's NCS for Chris. I would love for you to pre-order multiple copies. So thank you for Boswell for having us. This was great.
Oh, it was an honor to have both of you. I think we could listen to you go through the questions for another hour. Again, you're both so charming and erudite. And so don't forget, we have copies of Giannis. We're trying to get more. I think we'll get more book plates. We have a bookmark coming as well. And if you don't want to buy your book at Boswell, don't forget, you can go to any independent bookstore and go in and ask, and maybe you can say Boswell sent you, and maybe you can pre-order Chris's book as well, because there's some fine reading there. So thank you both so much. Continued success to you. Thanks to everyone for coming, because we wouldn't have a bookstore without you. And don't forget, we do have the links to click on to purchase both of the books. If you click now, that screen will stay there when the event ends. And also don't forget that we'll have a recording. It looks like everything went fine. I've like once erased after the event. And we'll send it all out to you, and you can share with all your friends. So thank you so much, everybody.